You are about to cross into a world where fear is real. Real stories, unexplained phenomena, where the supernatural lurks in the shadows. From the Portal of Dread. Story 1, The Invader in the Storm.
Greetings, brave ones, or merely the curious. Welcome to the Portal of Dread. Here, your fears find a voice, and every tale might be the last you hear before you extinguish the light. Think you're safe? Think again. There are moments when the sound of rain, which ought to soothe, transforms into a warning. Instances where the patter of raindrops blends with footsteps, breathing, and terror takes hold. Tonight, you will hear an account lived on a night just like this. The story of an ordinary person who confronted the kind of fear that leaves indelible marks. And it all began in the very same way, with rain, and a premonition that something was amiss, terribly amiss. This transpired when I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade. It's difficult to recall events from so long ago, yet this memory stands out. It isn't like the others. It's not an old, faded film. It's a wound that has never truly healed. It was a school day, and it rained intensely. I remember the scent of wet asphalt and the sound of my mother's car tires cutting through puddles when she picked me up from school. That evening, my parents had a social engagement, something significant for my father's work. They were supposed to return late, but return they would. The storm, however, had other plans. It transformed from a heavy rain into a biblical deluge, and the road home became a perilous river. I remember them calling me on the landline, my mother's voice laden with a concern she attempted to conceal. "Son, the road is impassable. We'll have to spend the night at your aunt and uncle's house who live nearby. Will you be all right?" I, with the bravado only an 8-year-old can muster, assured them I would. I was the man of the house. My mother, still hesitant, rattled off a list of tasks. Lock all the doors and windows, keep the hall light on, close the blinds. And don't open the door for anyone, you hear? No one. Typical precautions. I was too young to comprehend the true danger. To me, danger meant a scraped knee or a scolding for poor grades. Their absence wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity. Having the house to myself meant a feast of chips and soda for dinner and absolute dominion over the television. Absolute freedom. Of course, I didn't have a TV in my bedroom, so I settled into the living room, on the throne that was my father's sofa. I had promised myself I would complete my mother's chores before bed. But I had planned to stay up all night, embarking on a marathon of cartoons and films that were typically off-limits. Exhaustion, however, struck me full force midway through an adventure film. The last thing I recall is the hero leaping from a cliff. Then, darkness. I awoke hours later. The TV screen cast a faint, anemic glow. A heavy silence pervaded the house, broken only by the incessant roar of the storm and the cold. I distinctly remember a biting chill, a cold that seemed to emanate from within the very walls. Temperatures drop at night, of course, but the disparity was far too great. It was a damp cold, redolent of wet earth and cellar. I contemplated retreating back to sleep, curling up under the covers and ignoring everything. But my mother's voice echoed in my head. The list. I didn't want to incur her displeasure after she had placed her trust in me. With a groan, I forced myself to rise. My bare feet met the wooden floor, and a shiver ran down my spine. The floor was as frigid as a mortuary slab. I proceeded to check everything, step by step. The front door locked. I turned the key twice, just as my father always did. The back door in the kitchen also secured. The living room blinds drawn, the kitchen windows sealed. Everything was as it should be, which only deepened my confusion. Why was the house so cold? I surmised the storm must have impacted the heater. It was the only logical explanation. Too exhausted to investigate further, I accepted the explanation and decided it was time to retire for the night. I ascended the stairs, and with each step, the storm's roar grew louder, more intimate. My bedroom, with its large street-facing window, was where the sound became overwhelming. The rain wasn't merely striking the pane, it was lashing against it, as if trying to force its way in. Every minute, a flash of lightning momentarily painted my room in stark white and silver, illuminating superhero posters and scattered toys, followed by a peal of thunder that seemed to cleave the sky. I wasn't typically afraid of storms, but I began to worry that a tree might fall or that the glass might shatter. Lying in bed, tucked under the covers, I attempted to court sleep. That's when I began to discern strange sounds. They weren't from the storm. They were emanating from within the house itself. Creaks, like old timber shifting under a burden. But the upstairs floor was entirely carpeted. It couldn't be coming from my room. Initially, I dismissed them. The wind, the old house settling. But the sound didn't align with these explanations. It wasn't the sharp crack of the wind. It was a long, drawn-out moan. And it began to perturb me, seeping beneath the clamor of the rain. That creaking kept me awake, my gaze fixed on the dim ceiling. I sat up in bed, my heart beginning to quicken. I surveyed my surroundings, unsure what to look for. I tried to muffle the storm's roar with my hands over my ears, focusing instead on the creak. It emanated from my bedroom. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, a strobe-like burst that froze everything for a second. Everything appeared normal. The desk, the chair, the bookshelf. But my eyes were drawn to the only solid wood object there, the wardrobe. An antique, heavy piece of furniture that had belonged to my grandmother. The room plunged back into darkness. I remained motionless, my breath caught in my throat. A minute later, which felt like an eternity, another bolt of lightning struck. And in that split second, I saw something that made the air freeze in my lungs. The wardrobe door. It was ajar. A dark sliver, about 2 fingers wide. It had been closed before. I was absolutely certain. I had closed it myself that afternoon because it creaked. Something had opened it. Something was in my room. I didn't scream. I didn't speak. The sound died in my throat. A primal instinct seized me. I merely slid out of bed, as silently as possible, placing 1 foot at a time onto the soft carpet, as if the floor were made of delicate glass. That 3-meter journey from the bed to the door felt like a 1,000-kilometer trek through hostile territory. Every shadow was a menace, every sliver of light, a peril. I scurried down the stairs, making no sound, my feet barely grazing the steps. Fear lent me an agility I never knew I possessed. I dashed into the dining room and burrowed beneath the heavy oak table. Only then, huddled in the darkness, amidst the scent of dust and furniture polish, did I begin to weep silently, hot tears streaming down my cold face. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were too far away. I have no idea how long I remained there. Time ceased to hold meaning, but at some point, the creaking from upstairs ceased, and I heard footsteps descending the stairs. I held my breath, my chest aching. Any sound could spell my demise. They weren't normal steps. They were heavy, clumsy. It sounded as if that thing was stumbling down, leaning against the wall, almost toppling. The footsteps reached the ground floor and stopped. The ensuing silence was almost more unnerving than the noise. Then, the footsteps resumed, slow, exploratory. They advanced towards the table, as if they knew precisely where I was concealed. I believed I was about to perish. I squeezed my eyes shut, fervently praying it was merely a nightmare. And then, from beneath the table, I beheld them. 2 bare feet entered my field of vision. They were repulsive. The skin possessed a sickly yellowish hue and was damp, caked with mud and leaves. The legs, as far as I could discern, were slender and crisscrossed with cuts, as if they had traversed a thorny thicket. The creature swayed precariously, struggling to maintain its balance, and a putrid stench of damp earth and metal permeated the air. And just when I thought the situation could not possibly deteriorate further, something metallic and heavy slipped from its grasp, clattering to the floor with a resounding thud. A wrench, large and heavily rusted. It required every fiber of my being to suppress a scream. The sound remained lodged, a painful knot in my throat. Should that individual stoop to retrieve the implement, they would surely spot me. This was the end. With wide, fixed eyes, I watched as the figure halted. It began to crouch slowly, its knees cracking audibly. Terror utterly paralyzed me. I could discern the crown of a filthy, sparse and wet head of hair descending towards the floor. Towards me. The figure froze. Slowly, with an abrupt movement, it re-erected itself. It seemed startled, or perhaps taken aback by the noise. It glanced towards the front door, as though something had suddenly occurred to it. It abandoned the wrench on the floor and resumed its progress, now with increased alacrity. I heard the chaotic, staggering footsteps receding through the ground floor. And then, the sound of the front door's lock being disengaged, a loud, definitive click. The door swung open and then slammed shut with a decisive thud. The intruder had departed. I remained concealed for an extended period. An eternity, it seemed. Partly from fear, partly from sheer trauma. I trembled uncontrollably, utterly paralyzed. I was old enough to comprehend the inherent danger, yet too young to know how to effectively contend with it. The ensuing silence proved more terrifying than any sound. Eventually, the compelling urge to ascertain whether I was truly alone compelled me to emerge. I painstakingly crawled out from beneath the table. The first action I took was to retrieve the wrench from the floor. It felt cold and ponderous in my grasp, coated in a type of mud wholly unfamiliar to my surroundings. I hastened to my room and secreted it deep within a sock drawer, beneath all its contents. The following morning, after locking the door again, I discovered muddy footprints in the hallway, muddied puddles that marked the intruder's route. Armed with a dish towel and overwhelmed by desperate panic, I meticulously cleaned it all, scouring the floor until not a trace remained. The terror of what had transpired intermingled with the childish dread of being blamed for not having locked the doors earlier. When my parents returned, I remained silent. I kept it all to myself. It was only years later, as a teenager, that I confided in them. They struggled to believe me, convinced it was a nightmare I had conflated with reality. This ordeal left an indelible mark on me for the remainder of my childhood. I began sleeping with the light on and developed a profound dread of the dark that was slow to dissipate. The slightest creak in the house would startle me. The scent of rain and wet earth, which I had once cherished, now provoked anxiety in me. I locked my bedroom door every night, a habit I maintain to this day. To this day, I cannot explain what transpired, who or what that figure was. But I learned my lesson the hardest way imaginable. Lock your doors at night.
Story 2. The Rain and the Howl.
Rain offers me no soporific embrace. For others, it beckons slumber. For me, it stands as an insistent adversary. Each droplet striking the roof transforms into a relentless percussive thrum, an erratic cadence that insidiously infiltrates my consciousness, holding me captive in the throes of wakefulness. On that particular May night, with summer looming like a distant yet elusive promise, the downpour proved unyielding. 15 years of age, I resided with my parents in an oversized dwelling for the three of us. Their oft-repeated jest claimed they had never intended an only child, but destiny, or perhaps biological predisposition, had evidently dictated otherwise. This likely accounted for their perpetual, hyper-vigilant solicitude, effectively constructing a velvet cage around my existence. This solicitude intensified markedly due to my particular challenges. My corporeal form, it seemed, was a betrayer. Unbidden panic attacks would manifest, akin to internal tempests. I possessed a distinct proclivity to syncope under duress, as though my cerebrum simply opted to disengage from reality, and my very breath, in its most distressing iterations, appeared to conspire against me, becoming both shallow and laborious. Well past the witching hour, my eyes smarting and my mind reeling, I finally capitulated. Slumber, I knew, remained elusive. My thoughts drifted to my parents' perennial counsel for such nights, a panacea seemingly straightforward and rational to them, a perambulation. "The crisp air will do you good, son," they would assert. "It clears the mind." Our abode was situated within a secure residential enclave, one of those idyllic locales where bicycles are habitually left unattended in front yards. Our garden, in turn, abutted an expansive public park, whose lights cast an unceasing glow throughout the night, fashioning a dome of illusory security against the encroaching darkness. The very notion of venturing out constituted a subtle act of defiance. I deliberately left my mobile phone upon the nightstand. A luminous screen, I reasoned, would merely exacerbate my insomnia, and I yearned to experience the world unfiltered, unadulterated by distraction. Donning a vibrant yellow slicker, its hood drawn low to obscure my features, I descended the staircase on tiptoe, each groaning tread a perceived indictment. The house lay hushed, steeped in the tranquil respiration of my parents. I unlatched the back door and slipped into the humid night, into the tempest's chilling embrace. Outdoors, the world presented an uncharacteristic tranquility. The rain's auditory presence, now that I was enveloped by it, had transformed. No longer an assault, it manifested as an enveloping shroud. The trees swayed with a gentle undulation, their boughs glistening like silver under the phantasmagoric glow of the streetlights. The rich olfactory essence of damp earth and freshly mown grass permeated my lungs. For a moment, the tension in my shoulders seemed to melt away, the tight knots of anxiety beginning to unravel. This was precisely what I needed. I ambled aimlessly along the park's gravel paths, letting the rain wash the weariness from my mind. After about 20 minutes, the cold began to seep through my raincoat, and weariness finally started to weigh heavily on my eyelids. A welcome sign. I turned to head home, feeling a minor triumph over my insomnia. It was then, as my gaze fell upon the asphalt road bordering the park, that I saw it. A long, dark shape, prone in the middle of the wet roadway. At first, my brain tried to register it as a garbage bag, a large branch snapped by the storm, but the form was unmistakable. Legs, torso, head. It was a person, lying face down, utterly motionless beneath the incessant rain that hammered against their back. A cold, not born of the rain, spread through my chest, chilling my blood. The first logical explanation that struck me was the most dreadful: a hit and run. Someone injured, or worse. My parents had raised me to help. Never turn your back on someone in distress, my mother always used to say. To ignore it was simply not an option. Against every instinct of self-preservation that clamored within me, I began to walk towards the street. The rational part of my brain shrieked at me to turn back, to run home, lock the door and call the police. But the image of that helpless individual drew me onward. Each step was a battle. The soaked grass squelched underfoot, and the sound of my own breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the silent night. As I drew closer, the details came into sharper focus. Black trousers, a dark plaid shirt, drenched and clinging to the body. Clothing utterly unsuited for a storm, it looked like a man. There was no car in sight, no debris, no sound of screeching brakes. Only the figure and the rain. The air grew heavier, and the rain, which had earlier felt almost warm, now lashed me with a glacial cold. I was within a few meters of the road, on the verge of calling out, "Hey, are you all right?" when a sound ripped through the night. It came from somewhere behind me, from the depths of the park. A shrill cry, a howl that belonged to no animal I knew. It wasn't a wolf nor a dog. It was a sound of pain and fury, guttural and fractured, that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. I spun around sharply, my heart hammering like a caged bird, adrenaline flooding my veins. I saw nothing amidst the dark trees. The sound seemed to emanate from a distance, yet its uncanny nature utterly paralyzed me. Pure, primal fear seized me, and it was poised to become 1,000 times worse, because when I turned back towards the street, the person was no longer lying down. It was sitting, perfectly upright, its head craned in my direction, staring at me through the curtain of rain. My vision began to tunnel. The world around me dissolved into a hazy gray blur, the sound of the rain transforming into a distant, high-pitched hum deep within my skull. It was the onset of a panic attack. I knew the sensation all too well. The only thing keeping me upright was the absolute shock. Before I could process, before I could scream, the figure rose. It was no human movement, no strained effort of someone pushing themselves up from the ground. It was fluid, swift, unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. And it began to sprint towards me. A grotesque, demonic grin split its face, a white gash in the darkness. And in its hand, the metallic glint of a kitchen knife, the blade catching the sickly glow of the streetlights. The terror shattered my paralysis. "I'll kill you!" it shrieked, its hoarse, guttural voice vying with the roar of the storm. I turned and fled. I ran away from the sanctuary of my home, deeper into the park. The waterlogged grass was treacherous, my feet slipping with every desperate stride. The splashing footsteps in the mud behind me became a relentless cadence of approaching death. My lungs burned, feeling as though they were filled with broken glass. My breath hitched, transforming into short, desperate gasps. Black spots danced in my vision. I didn't need to look back to know it was close, to feel its malevolent presence. I knew I couldn't sustain the pace for long. The panic was consuming me. My body was on the verge of giving out, poised to betray me as it always did. My only chance was to conceal myself. I ran towards the densest part of the woods, the same direction from which the howl had emanated. The irony was not lost on me, but there was no other recourse. It was flee into the unknown, or be overtaken by the familiar. With the last vestiges of strength, I dove into the trees, the branches clawing at my face and arms. I threw myself behind a wide oak trunk, collapsing to my knees in the cold mud. I pressed my face against the rough, wet bark, striving to regulate my breathing, stifling the sobs that threatened to escape, praying he hadn't seen me. I waited. Time unraveled. Every second was an exquisite torture, stretched to its breaking point. I began to count. 1, 2, 3. The soul sounds were the incessant rain and the frenetic pounding of my heart against my ribs. I counted to keep from screaming. I counted to keep from collapsing. The pungent odor of damp soil and decomposition permeated my nostrils. I heard no footsteps. I heard nothing. The silence was almost as terrifying as the pursuit itself. Had he given up? Or was he out there waiting as silent as I? The indelible image of that smile haunted my thoughts. 10 minutes passed. 15. At some point, I heard the snap of a breaking branch not far off. My entire body tensed. I held my breath, anticipating the smiling face to appear from behind the tree. But nothing happened. Was it the wind? An animal? Or was it him toying with me? After what felt like an eternity, perhaps 20 minutes, the adrenaline began to recede, supplanted by an uncontrollable tremor. I risked a peek. There was no one. Only the trees and the rain. Stepping out from behind that tree was one of the most arduous acts of my life. Every muscle protested. I took the longest possible route around the back of the park, avoiding the illuminated paths, moving like a wraith through the shadows. Every passing car's headlights made me jump. Every tree's shadow seemed to morph into his figure. I emerged onto a street several blocks from home, my heart still lodged in my throat. No one followed me. The walk to my front door was a blur of paranoia. The windows of neighboring houses seemed like eyes scrutinizing me. Finally, I saw my house, my sanctuary. Once I finally entered and locked the door, my strength abandoned me. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, drenched and trembling, my body racked with silent sobs. I didn't call my parents. What would I say? How could I explain the howl, the man rising, the smile? They would think it was a panic attack, a hallucination, and perhaps a part of me wanted to believe that. I never found answers. The police found nothing, No reports of a man with a knife, no body on the road. It was as if the event had transpired solely for me. Presently, at 25 years of age, it is the howl that continues to most profoundly haunt me. I grapple with the notion that it was mere coincidence, the sound and then the movement. Were they connected? Was it a warning? Or was it a summons, and the man on the road was merely the response? I don't know who that man was, or what he wanted. There are simply deranged people in the world, I know. But that explanation seems paltry and hollow in the face of the terror of that night, of that unnatural contortion, of that smile that did not belong to this world. I still reside in the same city, though now in a third-floor apartment. And on rainy nights, when the drumming of drops on the window keeps me awake, my thoughts no longer turn to strolls. I get up, check the deadbolt 2, 3 times. I peer out the window at the wet, illuminated street below, and half of me, with a paralyzing dread, expects to see a dark figure prone on the asphalt. I think of the howl, the figure's ascent, and the demonic grin in the rain. And I wonder if whatever entity was in the park that night is still there, waiting, or if, worse yet, it knows where I live.
Story 3, Fright in the Forest.
The forest silence seems pure, but it isn't. The nothingness sometimes watches you in silence, waiting. I'm 29 years old, and one of the only things that truly clears my mind is camping. Not in parks with bathrooms and fees, but in the middle of nowhere, where it's just you, and whatever else is out there. Alex used to say I had this addiction to running away. But it wasn't escape, it was survival. Our apartment had become an emotional prison. Each week, fewer words, more distance. We started communicating through glances that avoided meeting. I knew he loved me, but I didn't know if he even liked me anymore. And that weighs on you. So one day, without drama, I just left a note on the door. I need air. And the air here no longer suits me. I returned to a place I discovered years before, hidden amongst ancient trees and the course of a river that seemed never-ending. A sanctuary. But when I arrived at the clearing and saw 2 pickup trucks, one white, one gray with a faded local sports team sticker, my chest tightened. I hadn't driven 4 hours to smile at strangers. I took a deep breath. I convinced myself the river was long. I wouldn't cross paths with them. It was just paranoia, like Alex used to say. But what he called paranoia, I called instinct. I turned off the engine, grabbed my backpack, walked along the narrow trail with the scent of pine invading my lungs and the sound of the river concealing my footsteps. That's when I saw them. 2 men fishing. One stronger with a thick beard, dirty vest, and a narrow gaze. The other, thinner in a baseball cap, seemed younger. The first one, upon seeing me, moved too quickly, covering something on the ground with his jacket. The movement was abrupt, rehearsed. "Hey, just so you know, we were shooting at some cans. Didn't mean to scare you." The other mumbled, "Sorry about him." I nodded, walked past. But what I saw in a fleeting glance looked furry and small. A squirrel, maybe, but the older man's gaze weighed on my back. I kept walking, but with my body on high alert. The forest seemed to breathe with me. A crack came from behind, quick, precise. When I turned around, just branches. But I felt someone was watching me. I found a more secluded spot, hidden by thick trees and dense bushes. I set up my tent with that almost ritualistic precision. Each stake was a vote of confidence that I was safe. Nothing. He vanished into the darkness. I ran. The trail seemed wider. Every shadow was him. Every broken branch, a warning. I reached the clearing. The trucks were still there, but there was something new. The door of the white truck was ajar. I approached. Inside, on the passenger floor, was a wallet. I picked it up. Milo. It was his. Photo with a boy. A card with his wife's name. Someone was waiting for him at home. I closed the door. A creak made me turn. The back of the gray truck was open. It wasn't like that before. I ran. I got into my truck. I locked the doors. I started the engine. I fled. Days later, at home, The camera was still with me. I took it to get developed. Part of me needed to see. The photos were worse than I imagined. Trees, footprints, Milo smiling. Then, me, from behind. Then from the front. And then, sleeping. Me, sleeping in the tent. He had already entered. Before everything. Before the axe. He already knew me. I screamed, I dropped everything, I vomited, I locked myself in the bathroom, I destroyed the camera. But one of the photos, I kept. It's here now, next to the axe, in a box in the closet. I kept the axe. Not for revenge, but to never forget that, in the middle of nowhere, I was the target. He didn't just take a photo, he took me with him. And since that night, I'm no longer alone in the nothingness, because now, the nothingness is always with me. Thank you for traversing this dark night with us on the Portal of Terror. Now tell me, would you have the courage to go through this? Share in the comments if you can sleep tonight. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell to receive more chilling stories every week. Sleep well, if you can. Until the next tale. Good night. Or is it?